They told him what to believe. They gave him a version of Islam carefully crafted to keep him away. They said it was a religion of oppression, of violence, of blind faith. And for years he believed them. He never questioned it. Until one day, he did. A scholar, a thinker, a man who had spent his entire life studying theology, history, and philosophy. He had read countless books, dissected countless ideologies, but one book had always been left out of the conversation. One book was always spoken about, but never truly explored. And so he decided to do what few had dared. He picked up the Quran, not to criticize, not to debate, but to understand. What happened next? It wasn't just surprising, it was life-changing. Because the moment he began to read, the moment he opened his mind to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had been misled, the truth hit him harder than he ever imagined. Stay with me, because what this Christian scholar discovered in the Quran will shake you to your core. This isn't just another story. This is a reality that many fear to acknowledge, but today we break the silence. A scholar's journey toward truth is never simple. It's a road paved with questions, challenges, and sometimes the courage to dismantle one's own beliefs. This Christian scholar was no different. He was a man of deep faith, someone who had spent years studying Christian theology, history, and scriptures. His life revolved around understanding God's messages conveyed in the Bible, defending his faith against criticisms, and preaching what he believed to be the ultimate truth. Yet something lingered in the back of his mind, questions that had no clear answers, contradictions he could not ignore, and a growing curiosity about Islam, a religion he had been warned against all his life. It wasn't easy for him to approach the Quran with an open mind. He had spent years believing that Islam was a distortion, an opposing ideology that had nothing to do with the God he worshipped. But as a scholar, he knew the importance of first-hand research. Relying on second-hand opinions, historical biases, or misinterpretations was never the way to find truth. So he decided to do something many in his field would never dare. He picked up a copy of the Quran, not to refute it, not to mock it, but to read it sincerely and without prejudice. The first thing that struck him was the structure of the book itself. Unlike any religious scripture he had studied before, the Quran wasn't a collection of human stories, nor was it arranged in chronological order. It was something entirely different. It spoke directly, with authority, as if it was challenging him personally. Every verse seemed to carry weight, addressing fundamental questions about life, purpose, and faith. He had expected philosophical debates, historical references, or poetic expressions, but what he found was a book that spoke with absolute certainty, as if its author had no doubt, no hesitation. As he continued reading, his discomfort grew. The Quran was unlike anything he had encountered. It wasn't merely a religious book. It was a declaration, a message that didn't leave room for negotiation. The more he read, the more he realized that Islam wasn't what he had been led to believe. There were no contradictions, no confusion about the nature of God, no philosophical uncertainties. The Quran was clear. God was one, indivisible, eternal, and without partners. This wasn't a new concept to him, but the way it was presented in the Quran left him unsettled. It was pure, uncompromising monotheism, undiluted by human interpretation. Then came the moment that changed everything. He found passages in the Quran that spoke about Jesus not as a figure rejected or diminished, but as a noble prophet, a messenger of God, born of a miraculous virgin birth, performing miracles by God's permission. He had expected the Quran to oppose Jesus, to diminish his significance. Instead, he found it defending him against distortions, clearing misconceptions, and honoring him in ways he had never seen before. This was not a book written by an adversary. It was a book that preserved truths lost in history. His heart pounded as he realized the gravity of what he had discovered. He had approached the Quran with skepticism, with the intent to analyze, to dissect it like an academic text. But now the words of the book were analyzing him. It wasn't just an intellectual exercise anymore. It was something deeper, something undeniable. As he continued reading, something unexpected happened. He found himself drawn not just to the content of the Quran, but to its rhythm, its flow, the way it spoke with unwavering confidence. It was unlike any scripture he had encountered before. The words were not just telling stories or recounting history, they were addressing him directly. Every passage felt personal, as if it was responding to the very thoughts forming in his mind. He had spent his life reading religious texts, analyzing ancient manuscripts, and deciphering theological arguments, but never had he encountered a book that seemed alive, a book that spoke to his soul rather than just his intellect. What troubled him most was the realization that the Quran was not a book of uncertainty or speculation. It did not rely on human reasoning, philosophical debates, or abstract metaphors to convey its message. It made statements clear, direct, and absolute. It did not present ideas as possibilities, but as undeniable truths. And the most profound of those truths was the oneness of God. He had always believed in one God, but here in the Quran, he found a definition of God that was beyond anything he had ever known. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. God was not a man, not a force within creation, not a mystery to be debated. God was one, eternal, absolute, and unlike anything in existence. The deeper he went, the more he realized that the Quran did not just explain monotheism, it established it in its purest form. It rejected any notion of intermediaries, any concept of divinity being shared, any idea that God could have human attributes or limitations. This was a radical departure from what he had always known. It was not just another perspective on theology. It was a complete deconstruction of the beliefs he had spent a lifetime defending, and yet it made sense. It was logical, consistent, and powerful in a way that no human explanation of God had ever been. He found himself questioning everything he had been taught. How could a book revealed over 1400 years ago hold such clarity, such precision? He had expected contradictions, vague interpretations, or claims that could be easily dismissed. Instead, he found consistency, a message that had remained unchanged, unaltered, and untwisted by history. He had spent years studying religious evolution, how doctrines changed over time, how councils and scholars redefined beliefs to fit the changing world. But here was a book that had remained untouched, unedited, unshaken by the passing of centuries. As he read further, he encountered verses challenging him, asking him to reflect, to think, to question the very foundations of his beliefs. He had never seen a scripture that invited scrutiny in this way. Most religious texts demanded faith without questioning, but the Quran insisted on reasoning, on seeking evidence, on not following blindly. This was not just a book of belief, it was a book of knowledge, a book that dared the reader to disprove it, to challenge its words, to find a flaw. And that was the part that frightened him the most. Because no matter how hard he tried, he could not find a single contradiction, a single inconsistency. As he delved deeper into the Quran, he encountered something that shook him to his core. The descriptions of past nations, civilizations long gone, and events that align perfectly with historical discoveries made centuries later. He had always believed religious texts to be either symbolic or influenced by the knowledge of their time, yet here was a book revealed over 1,400 years ago that contained precise details about places, people, and occurrences that were either unknown or misunderstood when it was first revealed. This realization sent shivers down his spine because it meant one thing: this knowledge did not come from a human source. He read about the destruction of lost civilizations, of people who defied divine guidance and suffered consequences that history later confirmed. He found verses describing ancient Egypt, the rule of pharaohs, and the practices of their time with such accuracy that it rivaled modern archaeological discoveries. The mention of Pharaoh's body being preserved as a sign for future generations left him speechless, because the mummified remains of Ramses II, the likely pharaoh of Moses' time, had been discovered only in the 19th century, long after the revelation of the Quran. How could a man in the deserts of Arabia, living in an era without historical records, have known this? He then turned his attention to the details about the people of the cave, a story that bore striking similarities to the ancient Christian legend of the seven sleepers of Ephesus, yet with key differences that align more closely with historical findings. The Quran did not merely repeat fables. It presented an account that corrected distortions that had crept into human records over time. This wasn't just storytelling, it was preservation of truth in its purest form. But the most astonishing part was the accuracy of the descriptions of geographical landmarks. The mention of the barrier between two seas that do not mix stunned him. Oceanography later confirmed this phenomenon, where different seas meet but maintain distinct characteristics due to varying densities and salinity levels. The reference to iron being sent down puzzled him until he learned that modern science confirms iron did not originate from Earth but was delivered through meteors, something no one could have known at the time. He read about the expansion of the universe, a fact that astrophysicists only confirmed in the 20th century, yet it was there in the Quran, revealed in a world that had no telescopes, no observatories, no knowledge of galaxies beyond what the naked eye could see. He struggled to reconcile this with everything he had been taught about religious texts being confined to the knowledge of their era. The Quran was breaking that notion entirely. He wanted to dismiss it, to find a way to explain it away as coincidence or interpretation, but the more he read, the clearer it became. This book contained knowledge that no man could have possessed at the time of its revelation. It was precise, unwavering, and beyond human capability. He had spent his life believing in logic and reasoning and evidence, yet here was something that defied human logic while remaining irrefutably true. The realization was overwhelming. This was not just a book of faith, it was a book of undeniable reality. He could not ignore the profound impact the Quran had on human hearts. It was not just the knowledge, the historical accuracy, or the scientific revelations that startled him. It was the way the words resonated, the way they reached deep into the soul. He had read many scriptures before, analyzed them with a critical eye, compared interpretations, and debated their meanings. But nothing had ever spoken to him the way this book did. It was as if the words were alive, carrying a weight that was beyond mere literature. There was a rhythm, a power in the way the verses flowed, a force that could not be explained by poetry or eloquence alone. He had always believed religious texts to be symbolic, shaped by human hands over centuries, altered and reinterpreted through time. But the Quran was different. It claimed to be unchanged, preserved in its original language since the moment of its revelation. He investigated this claim, looking for historical evidence of textual evolution, but he found none. Manuscripts dating back over 1,000 years matched word for word with the copies printed today. Not a single letter had been changed. No other religious scripture in history had remained this intact. The realization was unsettling. It meant that every verse he read was exactly as it had been revealed. No alterations, no reinterpretations, no human interference. But what shook him the most was the challenge the Quran presented. It did not ask for blind faith. It called for reflection, questioning, and reasoning. It openly invited scrutiny, declaring that if it were from any other than God, it would contain contradictions. He searched for inconsistencies, contradictions, places where the text might falter, but he found none. The message remained consistent, unwavering, and clear. This was not the work of a man, bound by the knowledge of his time. It was something beyond human ability. The more he read, the more he saw how the Quran directly addressed the deepest struggles of human existence. The purpose of life, the nature of justice, the reality of the soul, and what awaited beyond this world. It provided answers that were neither vague nor abstract, but precise and logical. It described the human condition with an accuracy that felt personal, as if it was speaking directly to him. Every question he had ever asked about existence, morality, and destiny seemed to have already been answered within its pages. He had started this journey out of curiosity, expecting to find another religious text filled with mythologies and moral parables, but he had found something completely different. He could not deny that the words carried an authority unlike anything he had encountered before. He realized that the Quran was not asking him to believe without reason. It was giving him every reason to believe. The more he resisted, the more the truth became undeniable. He was no longer reading just a book. He was standing before something that had the power to change everything he thought he knew. He had spent years believing that faith was a matter of tradition, something inherited rather than discovered. He had been taught that religious conviction was based on emotion, shaped by culture, reinforced by history, and rarely grounded in reason. But the more he read the Quran, the more he realized that it was not demanding blind faith. It was demanding understanding. It was not a book that asked its readers to accept without questioning. Rather, it challenged them to reflect, to think, to seek the truth for themselves. Every verse seemed to call out to his intellect, forcing him to reconsider everything he had once taken for granted. He had always believed that religion and reason could not coexist, that faith was opposed to logic, that belief required the abandonment of critical thinking. But the Quran shattered that assumption. It was not afraid of scrutiny, it encouraged it. It presented evidence, it asked its readers to look at the universe, to observe the laws of nature, to study history, and to use their minds to arrive at the truth. This was unlike anything he had encountered before. It was not the kind of faith he had known, the kind that required submission without understanding. This was something deeper, something rational, something undeniable. He had been skeptical of the idea that one book could contain knowledge that surpassed its time. Yet, as he read, he found descriptions of the natural world, the development of the human embryo, the expansion of the universe, concepts that modern science had only recently discovered. How could a man living in the 7th century have known these things? How could he have described the world with such precision in a time when there were no telescopes, no microscopes, no scientific instruments? The only explanation that made sense was the one the Quran itself provided, that these were not the words of a man, but the words of the Creator. He saw how history had been rewritten, how narratives had been shaped to hide the truth. He had been told that Islam was a religion of oppression, yet he found it emphasizing justice, mercy, and equality. He had been led to believe that the Quran promoted violence, yet he found it condemning injustice, calling for peace, and upholding the dignity of all human beings. He had been warned that Islam was a threat to knowledge, yet he saw that it was the very force that had led to centuries of scientific discovery, that his very first command was to read, to seek knowledge, to never stop learning. He had entered this journey expecting to disprove, to argue, to challenge. But with every question he raised, the Quran provided an answer. With every doubt he held, the words before him dissolved it. He realized that the misconceptions he had carried were not because the truth was unclear, but because the truth had been hidden from him. Now he could no longer ignore it. The clarity of its message, the consistency of its teachings, the way it spoke to both the heart and the mind. He could no longer deny that this book, this revelation, was something beyond human comprehension. He had always believed that religions were mere human constructs shaped by time, culture, and power. He thought that every faith was just a collection of traditions passed down through generations, modified by history and influenced by those in authority. But as he read the Quran, he realized this was something entirely different. It was not a book shaped by human hands, nor was it altered by political ambitions or cultural shifts. It carried a message that transcended time, untainted and unchanged. The words he read were the same words that had been recited over 1,400 years ago, preserved in their original form, untouched by human corruption. This was not just another religious text, it was something divine. He had always been told that faith was a matter of emotion, something to be felt rather than understood. But the Quran was not appealing to his emotions alone, it was calling out to his intellect. It was challenging him to think, to reason, to reflect. Every verse seemed to confront him with undeniable logic, urging him to seek evidence, to question, to verify. Unlike other scriptures he had studied, this book did not ask him to believe blindly. Instead, it provided proofs, scientific, historical, and philosophical, making it impossible for him to dismiss its message as mere mythology. He had believed that religious texts belonged to the past, that they held no relevance to the modern world. But the Quran spoke with a timeless voice. It addressed the deepest struggles of the human soul, the conflicts of society, the moral dilemmas that transcended generations. It spoke about justice, compassion, patience, gratitude, principles that were not bound by time. It provided answers to the very questions humanity was still grappling with today. In an age where technology was advancing but morality was declining, where knowledge was increasing but wisdom was fading, he saw that the Quran was not outdated. It was needed now more than ever. He had been conditioned to believe that Islam was rigid, that it left no room for growth or intellectual exploration. Yet as he read further, he saw how Islam encouraged knowledge, how it valued science, how it commanded its followers to seek understanding. The Quran did not discourage curiosity, it demanded it. He realized that the greatest minds of the past, scientists, philosophers, mathematicians, had drawn their inspiration from this book. He saw that Islam had been the driving force behind centuries of enlightenment, a civilization that had given the world algebra, medicine, astronomy, and countless other advancements. He had assumed that embracing the Quran would mean abandoning his identity, leaving behind his culture, his heritage, his history. But as he reflected, he saw that this book was not asking him to reject who he was. It was offering him clarity, purpose, and direction. It was not erasing his past. It was illuminating his future. It was not restricting him. It was freeing him. For the first time in his life, he understood what it truly meant to be connected to something greater than himself. What he discovered was not just a book, not just words on a page, but a truth so powerful it shattered every misconception he had ever known. The Quran was not merely a scripture. It was a living guidance, a voice that spoke beyond centuries, calling every soul to reflect, to question, to seek. It was not about blind faith, it was about undeniable reality. And the more he read, the more he realized that everything he had been told about Islam was incomplete, distorted, or simply untrue. He had spent years searching for wisdom, for meaning, for something that made sense of the world, and now he stood face to face with it. He had found answers where he least expected them, in a book that had remained unchanged for over 1,400 years, a book that spoke to the heart, the mind, and the soul alike. He had been told lies about Islam, but now he saw the truth. And once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. To those who are still searching, to those who are still questioning, let this be a reminder: truth has always been there. You only have to be willing to look. And when you do, you might just find something that changes your life forever. May you find the courage to seek knowledge, the strength to question what you've been told, and the wisdom to embrace the truth when it stands before you.